Good afternoon, everyone. So as we heard from the prior panel, the world has changed. The wireless paradigm is completely changed. In the old model, the network operator did everything end-to-end, controlled the user experience, defined the apps, delivered the apps which were mostly targeted to the mainstream. In the new world, everything is different. We have handset vendors and web players competing aggressively for new revenue models, which are made possible by the web, the wireless content that's now available, the content that's now available in the wireless world, and they are trying to capture more value. We have over-the-top players who are trying to also capture some of the value in the new paradigm. We have users now who have choices of defining their own user experience, downloading, choosing among millions of apps. And then the network operators are seeing that their traffic on their network is growing, but the revenue is not growing linearly with the traffic. They're seeing more and more bandwidth utilization, but they're not able to monetize to the same level that they used to in the older days. Then we have 4G enabling enabling more bandwidth, maybe delivered more cost effectively, but at the same time, it's a more flat technology, IP based, which makes it easier for over-the-top players to play in the new environment. So what does this mean for service providers, for network operators? I think network operators will still have a very, very large role to play. They have capabilities in the network that they can leverage to define a superior user experience, and they're able to capture more value in the new in this new paradigm. But there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. What's the role of the operators in this environment? What's the role of the handset vendors, of the app developers? We heard from the app developers before, very great panel. Who's controlling the user experience? What's the new revenue model? Who's going to win? And what are all of these? What are the challenges along the way? Lots more questions. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions as well. We have a great panel. We have Brenda and Connor, Business and Solutions Creation with Ericsson. Kittur Nagesh,
hello.
Director, Service Provider Marketing for Cisco. And Vince Spinelli, VP of Technology Development for Starent. And Bill Goodman, Director of Converged Services Architecture with Verizon's technology organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda, she's going to talk more about the new paradigm and give a bigger perspective on the app store and start to talk about the service provider's perspective.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Brenda Connor, and I work for Ericsson, which is a services and equipment telecommunications provider. And I'm responsible for our North American strategy in the area of the service delivery ecosystem. And what I'd like to start out this session with is to sort of put the App Store in the broader context of a service delivery ecosystem. Sort of like look at the bigger picture, and then where does the App Store fit within that? In 5 slides or less. So what are some of the market trends that are driving the App Store? Because that's kind of important to understand. And we're all aware that fixed mobile convergence happened, and that was all about transforming networks into an all-IP infrastructure. And then, of course, you've already got lots of mobile devices out there. It's a platform in its own right. There's like 4 billion mobile phones out there, and everyone's interested in capturing some part of that sort of platform. And then there's the user-generated. Users want to generate content. They want to generate applications. So the days where the operator makes a few applications and that's what you use are sort of in the past. It's now more users and developers want to sort of customize the experience that the end user is seeing. And then there's the success of the Apple App Store. And what that really is saying is that, who controls, I hear that who controls the user experience? Well, in my perspective, it's the device manufacturer that's really controlling that user experience. And when folks first bought the iPhone, it wasn't because it was the greatest telephone in the world. It was because they like to do this with their thumb on that touchscreen, right? And scroll through things. So it was the end user experience was dictated by the device manufacturer. And then, of course, what does the end user want? They'd like to have any service, anywhere, any device. So the device manufacturer, being the exclusive driver of the end user experience, has its limits on what it can achieve, because this is a multi-vendor environment, right? And that's where the operators really have a unique value to provide. So I always like to look at some numbers. So when we look at iPhone and the reach that it has, it's really only hitting less than 0.5% of the devices that are out there. And it's really targeting and addressing the smartphone market, which in itself is a large market, but there's also 80% other sorts of devices out there that can be reached in the feature phone space. And there's where opportunity for operators is important. I'm not touching anything.
Screensaver.
It's usually rule number one. You have to be a hardware engineer to know that at a podium you can sort of screw in the cable, but I don't know. So, and then there's the device OS fragmentation that we talk about. It's hard for developers. We heard that from the panel, having all these sort of devices. So the operator certainly needs to play in that area. But what do the end user value is that sort of trusted relationship, and using a credit card with all the concerns about identity theft and fraud and scams and such, being able to provide the billing via the operator for the applications you're done with, that's value that the operators can provide. And the operators can actually open up their networks, as we've talked about, to sort of broaden the capabilities that are available. I think Bill's going to touch on that in his part. So interesting to look at is that the service models or the business models that are involved here. So if I could look on the left, you had the sort of walled garden environment where an operator is providing his services, right? And it's not, is it in replacing the new paradigm? Is it replacing the old way? It's rather it's supplementing, or working side by side. It's supplementing. So you're still going to have the sort of walled garden applications that an operator provides. And then if you look on the very right, you have the over-the-top where your device manufacturer-related app stores like from Apple are sitting. So it's in the center zone where the operator is opening up his network and providing access to his enablers, to his, I heard them in the last session ask for things like voice, messaging. There's also presence, lots of different enablers that an operator are exposing that you can get access to enrich and enhance the applications that developers are able to provide. So there's different business models that exist there, from the servers being outside of the operator's environment to being inside. Do I trust you? Do I not trust you? And there's different revenue potentials that are available depending on sort of the segment, the service model that you're sitting in. And my colleague next will talk a little bit more about business models when he comes up. And then, of course, there's always some sort of reference model where all these pieces are fitting together. And this is a Telco 2.0 kind of a solution where you see in the lower right-hand corner there is an app store. And as the operators are exposing their network capabilities, as you see there where the service broker on the left-hand side, that's sort of like what Verizon is doing with their recently announced network APIs, where the goal there is to expose the network from the operator's perspective in a way that they can do policy control, throttling control, and charging on the edge of the network, because there's still a certain amount of control that they're quite interested in providing there. And typically there you're seeing things like RESTful interfaces, web services, widgets, these kinds of things being exposed. And in the lower part, you have the sort of IMS-related services and these kinds of things where you're able to access more real-time capabilities from operators, create services that are providing value out to end users. Typically, the applications are sitting inside operators' environment. But there's an entire ecosystem that an app store is sitting within. So it doesn't replace it. It fits within a broader context where it's providing functionality. And then if I look at the end user experience, right, as the operator can allow the access to a web-based environment, even on the feature phones, which is what you see on the left-hand side. In addition to the sort of experience you can see on your sort of smartphones with the richer environment, which really looks a lot like the environment you could have on your PC, there on your phone. And the performance that you're looking for with the speed of the refreshing of the screens and stuff, really enabled by your sort of 3G and 4G bandwidths that are coming up there. So there's a lot of these ecosystem elements that are coming to play. And so in closing, what I'd like to say, who's the real winner in this new paradigm? And the real winner is the end user, from my opinion, because everybody's focused on the end user experience, right? Are there other winners? Well, in my view, that sort of depends on the scope that each operator chooses to use when they're defining their service delivery ecosystem, because in reality, to be successful in that space, it's a right mix of people, process, and technology. And technology is really the easy part. And it's in the people and the process parts which are key for you being able to be profitable. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to speak more about the business models to my colleague.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Nagesh, who's going to talk about scaling and business models. He's going to talk about what the new paradigm means for network operators.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Lillian. It's a fascinating time in the mobile industry, because this topic about the App Store is, in my humble opinion, just the tip of the iceberg. And the ultimate destination will be profoundly beneficial to the consumer, where truly the anytime, any service, any app, anywhere will become a reality. But right now, the market in a massive transition. There is the disruption going on because of the total divergence between the consumption of data services and the cents per bit they are making. And I think I made a comment in the earlier session that earlier the operators were making a proportionately significant portion of the revenue from the bits navigating the network. Now the language is now changed into how much I'm making per megabit or megabyte. In the future it could be hundreds of megabytes. Some consumers it could be gigabytes. So that is a fundamental disruption that needs to be handled. The second disruption that needs to be handled is the massive scale with billions of users, like Brenda talked about, 65,000 applications that's there on the App Store. So this also needs to be accounted for in discussing what this App Store means to the operator. And the third one is, because of the above two, the business models are getting redefined. And I do want to tell you that any business model where the operator is not profitable won't have a sustained life. You may see consolidation, you may see some people getting wiped out, you may see some people thrive and make a lot of money, but in the interest of the ecosystem, despite the disruption of the value chain, I think we all need to collaborate to make sure that the operators are there providing the service, whether internet access is a utility or application providers riding over the top. It is in our interest to make sure that you at least have a set of viable operators to provide the services. So this captures what is happening because of the three major transitions going simultaneously on in the market. And so this is the challenge, correct? With the revenue shrinking and the data exploding and a lot of people riding over the top and the insight of the different applications being lost by the operator, how do they provide the services and the scale while still controlling their OPEX and CAPEX? Fundamental challenge. But there is some good news. The App Store, like I said, is a journey towards a final destination. With the proliferation of the smartphones and the ease of use that Apple demonstrated, The good news to the operators is it is also driving traditional services. I do want to emphasize that in this euphoria over data services, it doesn't mean that the traditional services are not consumed. What we have found is people that use the iPhones and the smartphones are the ones that also send a lot more email, send a lot more SMSs. So there is good news in this package. And in some sense, this is a train that is coming head on, and shying away from it is not the answer, whether it's the App Store or the data explosion. So we believe that there are three fundamental pillars that need to be built to handle this, and I'll link this to the App Store in a minute. For example, video is projected through the Cisco Visual Networking Index study to be 2/3 of the traffic in the next 5 years, which means the correlation between bit and money is weaker and weaker. And then there is machine to machine. Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? We believe that in this combination, for the right type of providers and operators, it is a huge opportunity. That they can actually deliver on the service velocity, benefit from the app stores, moving towards a true open API and an open ecosystem while being profitable. Did some research on this along with a few other third parties. These are some of the barriers for operators, especially as they go through this journey from the past towards the future. Correct? As interconnect becomes easier and easier, and the user expectation on this integrated voice video data service becomes almost the baseline, the role of security, the QoS, the personalization, those are all extremely critical to distinguish a good operator from a lackluster operator, a good user experience from an average one. And I think this is an area for differentiation, which means the intelligence need to be built in a scalable manner where the network will play collaboratively with the endpoint or the device. For example, the device is wonderful to understand the neighborhood, connection management, power management. The network is wonderful to deliver the hosted services, cloud services, bring video and other latency-sensitive apps closer to the user. And Vince actually will touch on how they can architect the network to deliver on these capabilities. Then the second area, which is the barrier that needs to be overcome, is this notion of interoperability. The App Store phenomena will succeed if the application developers are happy, their velocity of innovation is fast, and they are making money, but not totally at the expense of the operators. And this interoperability and the mutual expectation that they can write once and literally run on billions of devices would be a wonderful thing to achieve. I will send you these slides. You'll see the concerns that many of the operators expected. On the right-hand side on this chart, you see some of the answers. And on the solution side, it may be a tiering of bundled services, where each bundle may be targeting certain segment and demographics, and it's monetizable as an annuity. That is essential for the App Store to be viable for the operators. Then there are other things that the operators have to do to become part of the value chain with the app developers. I mentioned to you that the value chain is getting disrupted. Operators are not used to thinking that the app developers are part and parcel of the new revenue streams. Right? So there's revenue sharing, and how can the operator leverage their assets? Subscriber management, right? Marketing, outlet stores, information on location, personalization of services, differentiated services on the network. Take out all those things from the App Store. Like TS was mentioning in the earlier session, why should TS know about marketing? Why shouldn't his company work with the operator who will take care of all those things? There is a win-win, because I, as an operator, I know the subscribers, what they do, their zip code. I can do targeted ad. I can offer personalized services. I can build annuity into the bundled services. That is a win-win collaboration. That's what I mean by the first bubble on the right. How do we gain revenue and share the revenue? And the right skill sets. What is core and what is context between the operator and the app developer? And of course, building the sustainable partnerships in the process. And in any disruption, the revenue is distributed. And I do believe that the right operators will actually make a lot of money if they do some of the things mentioned on these charts. And this slide, I want to spin it in the area of innovation. The App Store moving towards the true internet model of publish and subscribe. You publish your app, people subscribe, you show value, you make money. You don't show value, your app will wither away. That's really what's happening in the internet, and there's no reason why the same phenomena shouldn't happen in the mobile space. So how do you add value? Enhance the user personalization. After the appetizing nature of the applications, I think how relevant it is from a business or consumer experience. Does the operator provide profiles and sub-profiles and link it to the applications and the bundles? Correct? Do I, as an operator, deliver the quality of experience that the app developers think that it's better to write onto my network first? Because video will thrive and shine in all its glory, correct? And then understand the subscriber. Here, the wealth of information is with the operator. I encourage the app developers to make the app operators your partners. You will never understand the subscribers to the extent they already know. They can spin social networking for their 80 million subscribers to make it more relevant. Create interconnected applications, whether it's location or personalized services. This is something ripe for partnership. So in conclusion, I do want to say that there's a three-part strategy that operators need to adopt. First is, in some sense, control and defend. Make sure that the revenue streams are going on in areas where you're already strong, correct? And keep adding new services. The second piece is collaborate and enable. Look at all your competitors. Think them as partners and see who are viable partners. Is your cable provider a partner for the mobile operator? You bet. You can ride over the top at home through their services and benefit from your marketing, correct? There are new ways of looking at it. That's what I mean by the second one. And then get a handle on over-the-top applications. My colleague, my ex-colleague, and my panelist here, Vince, will talk about it. And the third one is, how do you build on the first two and extend your coverage so that your cost per subscriber overall comes down and your revenue per application overall goes up. And to make all these things happen in a scalable manner, I'm not saying this just as Cisco, but it has to be a scalable model in terms of service creation, service delivery, service monitoring, and personalization and policy. So the network, which is one of their biggest assets, will be monetizable. It doesn't become like a utility where the operator cannot distinguish. Those are my comments. With that, I'll hand it back to Lilian.
Now we'll turn it over to Vince, who's going to talk about the network and service evolution leading to new business models.
Thanks, Lilian. Thank you. I'm going to share a couple thoughts around the motivation for migration to 4G and really sort of the implications of the evolving network services and applications that 4G basically enables. But before I do that, before I get into that, in the audience, how many people here are from the operator community? Okay, a couple, just a couple. Fixed or mobile? Mobile? Okay, good. So in terms of the evolving network and the evolving infrastructure, we kind of view the winning formula as a set of 4 equations and many, many unknowns, as an evolved solution set. So you have devices, you have the evolution of the RAN, you have network services, and you have applications. And there's a clear distinction, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the evolution of network services and how they evolve ultimately into applications and the segments that will evolve later as 4G networks start to mature. But to start, from a RAN perspective, one of the motivations for moving to 4G, which is an OFDMA technology, is from a mobile operator perspective, the spectral efficiency of OFDMA as compared to CDMA is about 10 times better. So there's that cost aspect from an operator perspective. The second reason is that the overall architecture for 4G, it basically is much flatter, much simpler, accommodates and allows for things like IPv6 and solves a lot of technical issues. But the two most compelling technical issues, in 4G networks that are solved are the QoS and the delay problems, right? One of the big issues in 2G networks, 2.5G data networks and 3G data networks was the delay over the RAN, which was somewhere around 100 milliseconds or so, and then the delay or the lack of QoS and proper QoS to deliver real-time services. And so 4G sort of solves a lot of those things, and now we have the ability to deliver real-time peer-to-peer applications over a wireless access network. So that's pretty much where I'm going to leave off. I think one of the compelling events that 4G actually allows us to bring to market is an evolution of services. In the old days in the 2G world, we moved from a network architecture that was basically built for a single application, voice, over a very purpose-built TDM and TDMA-based infrastructure just to support voice, and then messaging, the evolution of messaging came along, and then ultimately data. If you look at what's happening, in the 3G world today, and as the utility of the RAN has gotten much more dynamic, much more usable, what we find is that users are essentially using the mobile internet in much the same way they're using the fixed internet. And if you look from a network services perspective, what this actually starts to bring to market is we can now start to leverage the network and start to monetize some of the network infrastructure that has been purchased to derive new sources of revenue from more siloed data network-based services. So things like enterprise access, things like enterprise network access. So what I mean by that are technologies that are being deployed today from like Verizon and AT&T around MiFi, or there's new technologies called NEMO around deploying mobile routers, if you will. And the implication there is that monetize the infrastructure by going after enterprise access services. There's a list of about 50 different enterprise verticals. And when I say the word enterprise, I generally use that in a very broad context to mean SOHO, small, medium business, and Fortune 500. To go after things like dial backup applications, replacing ISDN lines with EVDO WICs or HSPA interface cards to provide some dial backup to the leased line infrastructure in the enterprise. Loss prevention, transportation, the medical community, all have a number of use cases around mobile networks and this notion of machine to machine. So mobile networks is part of this broader machine to machine paradigm that a lot of you have probably heard about. The other part of surrounding machine to machine, which is becoming a sort of the next killer service, if you will, is embedded devices. So when you look and you start to study what the meter reading companies are doing, the gas meters, all these devices are starting to come embedded with mobile broadband technologies, either from a 3G and then eventually a 4G flavor. Right, the biggest the device seller on the market today is now starting to netbooks, right? Netbooks, embedded devices being sold in Verizon and AT&T and so forth. So we're going to see a proliferation of these things, where further monetization of the network can take place. But I think what will start to happen over time is as 4G takes off and the apps become more relevant, what's happening is the value of the network is changing. And if you looked at my subtitle on the first slide, I think this notion of the iPhone that Lillian had brought up and the App Store that everyone's trying to bring to market is just really one example of how we can monetize the internet. And so there's a broader context, a broader macroeconomic context around the evolution of networks and the evolution of mobile networks as it pertains to apps. At the end of the day, outside of the App Store, applications are free. The value of the network is changing to the value of the transaction. And so the question becomes, how do we start to monetize, the transaction? So what does that mean? We'll take a look at that. I think for some of you who sat in the last two panel discussions, you probably heard a plethora of remarks around, from an operator perspective, there has to be some paradigm changes, right? It's no longer not just about the network, right? It really becomes, now that we have this infrastructure deployed, how do we monetize this, which really becomes more of a marketing exercise in terms of, how we monetize the transaction-based, mobile internet. Okay, and we'll examine a couple of those in a few minutes. Nagesh, in the last presentation, sort of pointed this out. In the current thinking around services and mobile applications, oops. In the current thinking, we've built this core infrastructure centered around IMS and the IMS framework, which could basically be broken up into three areas: access, service control, and service convergence. What ends up happening today is all these over-the-top applications represent a cost. And so today what's happening is you're seeing a lot of deployments around PCRFs and other IMS components to provide usage controls, right? But that's not going to scale. And this is basically to try to solve the problem of revenue growing like this, but costs growing like this because of all the increased bandwidth. What we need to do is get into this Telco 2.0 framework where we leverage the infrastructure by looking at the underlying value and the underlying business model from all the websites and the application providers that are on the internet and participate in that revenue chain, inside that value chain to derive revenue instead of just being a cost to the operator. And so this is sort of a picture that depicts that there's actually a mistake in this one. There should also be a line between the service provider and the content provider as well. So today, the big push is, and all the revenues being primarily driven, from consumers and consumer access. We believe that there's a step and a phased approach to getting there by targeting things like enterprise applications. And developing marketing organizations who can build and host things like enterprise mashups and enterprise apps for specific industry verticals and so forth. And so we believe that that's the new way to enter and monetize this space. I'm going to kind of skip this slide in the interest of time because I only have a couple minutes left and we can take some questions afterwards. But I want to conclude by saying, the value of the network has changed. We moved from a sort of a siloed voice infrastructure into today converged voice and data network services, and ultimately moving towards community of interest networks. And so if you look at things like Facebook and other applications, these applications are really designed to reach people. And so the question is, how do I make money, from these particular applications? And so advertising is the big one, right? We can sell things through retail and so forth. There's this transition from the pipe to the big pipe and into the value of the communications channel as being sort of this virtual, distribution mechanism, if you will. Right? Think of the network now as sort of a supermarket and a supermarket with store shelves, a virtual market with store shelves. How do I, what do I place on those store shelves? What kind of information do I place on those store shelves? I place things like advertising. I place like app stores where I'm selling different utilities and apps and so forth, right? And so the sky's the limit, and the point here is that it really becomes a marketing exercise to understand and figure out, what items we're going to place inside those virtual store shelves. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. And now we have Bill, who's going to give the network operator's perspective. He's going to talk about how the network actually enable some of these capabilities, and he's going to talk about how Verizon is developing this capability to enable new apps on its network.
I was hoping you were going to do that. Switch over.
Because I know mine.
Thank you, Lillian. I'd like to you notice I crossed out I modified the title a little bit. I view this as the network operator's advantage. And what I'd like to do is give you a vision for starting out with a services scenario, an integrated services experience that, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I just want to quickly go through to kind of highlight what's possible and think of it in terms of the network contribution to these set of services. And then I'll come back and spend the last few minutes on what I think the fundamentals of the network operator advantage are, and specifically what Verizon's doing with some recent announcements in exposing some network capabilities to a broader development community. So start out with, and I like to trace through the day in the life of a business person, kind of much like myself, getting up for work, maybe in Philadelphia, having to commute by train to New York for give a presentation at headquarters. And let's go through how technology might enable and improve the experience of that person's day. So as our hero is awoken, the alarm has negotiated with his calendar because, of course, it's a network-based calendar, understands he has an 8 o'clock train, negotiated a time based on the time of the appointment, the expected traffic and distance between there, having access to all that information, and he's awoken, and then presented with a number of options for prioritizing alerts throughout the day. He gets ready and finds himself with a few extra minutes before the shuttle picks him up to the train station. And his favorite baseball team was playing last night late. The Phillies were playing on the West Coast. He couldn't stay up to watch it. So network PVR, all the channels he subscribes to are recorded and available. So he goes in and starts viewing last night's game. His presence is automatically set to home because of where he is based on location and the time of day. But his boss has called his office, and his boss is on a VIP calling list, so overrides presence and gets routed to his home. And, of course, he's watching TV. The network knows that, so the caller ID appears. And as he answers the call, the video automatically pauses. He takes the call, and the shuttle arrives, so he leaves his home. And as the shuttle is pulling out of his neighborhood, his dual-mode device has migrated seamlessly from Wi-Fi, which gives him the best signal in his home, to the cellular network. He receives an alert, and it's routed to his cell phone because the network understands he's mobile at the time based on his presence and location. And it's a traffic alert. An accident has happened on his normal route. He negotiates with the driver and gets around that alert. He resumes watching the game on his cell phone. Of course, the network bookmarked it. It's the same session. He's picking it up on a different device, so he just restarts it, and he picks it up. But he's interrupted again overnight. His unknown to him, his fridge has gone on the fritz, but it's an LTE-enabled fridge. It negotiated with the manufacturer. They diagnosed the problem over the air overnight. Manufacturer communicated with the service agency in the morning, and they are texting him with a proposed appointment time to come out. And it's still under warranty. That's the unbelievable part of the story. He gets to the train station, flashes his cell phone in front of a kiosk. It authenticates him because the network provider is also his identity management provider, and authorizes the transaction. It also negotiates and sets his phone up for alerts, not just general, but for his particular train, his round trip down and back, boarding times, delays, and that type of thing. He goes off looking for some breakfast in the train station, and as he's just finished purchasing his bagel, an alert comes on. His train is boarding, so he gets on the train, opens up his laptop, again resumes viewing the game. Again, just a different device, the same session. So you're getting the idea here where this is all going. Wraps up breakfast. He wants to work on his presentation, just get some last-minute adjustments, like we all did, I'm sure, this morning. And he opens up his virtual multimedia terminal application. He has a rich GUI on his laptop, of course. It can control all his devices that are logged onto the network, his cell phone and others, and all his services and characteristics in the network. And so as he's editing his presentation, he realizes that there's some inconsistencies in there. He wants to talk with the small team he works with who created the presentation. They're a group in his address book. So he clicks on them, and his address book is presented with some options.